It is 1 p.m. on the West Coast, and this is the first ever Mighty Rip live stream on the YouTube channel. I am Dave DeBaugh, and I want to talk sports with you. Coming up on the Mighty Rip pod today, we are going to take a deep look at the National Basketball Association as a whole. Now, we did this on our last podcast, and since this is our first ever live stream, we thought, why not go ahead and sort of cover some of the same things that we covered in our most recent podcast. So we're going to cover that. Plus, I'm going to talk about the National Football League and the complete silliness of the NFL as it decided to allow legalized gambling lounges in football arenas across the country. The caveat here is that you're not actually able to gamble. So you've got these football lounges in these stadiums, which are set up for gambling, and yet you're not actually able to gamble. That's equivalent to walking into a bar and not being able to receive a beer. I'm just saying, an absolutely ridiculous thing by the National Football League. So we're going to get into that fairly deeply as we go in our first ever live stream on YouTube for Mighty.Rip. Mighty.Rip is our website. You can check it out, and you can also access our podcasts all over the podcasting world. We are everywhere out there, North America. Okay, so we're going to get into it with our one viewer. We currently have one viewer, at least according to this system. That is if I know how this thing actually works. That being said, we're going to go ahead and kick it off and take a deep look at your National Basketball Association. All right. So we're going to start specifically at the bottom. And I have so much to say about the bottom of the National Basketball Association. And we're going to start in the East with the Cleveland Cavaliers, who made one of the most horrific trades at the trading deadline as they brought in Andre Drummond. Now, at the surface, I'm a huge Andre Drummond fan. I mean, he is the league leader in rebounds. And trust me, when he plays for the Cleveland Cavaliers, he's certainly going to continue to get a lot of rebounds because nobody on that team can actually shoot a ball. Anyways, but the reality of the situation between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Detroit Pistons is that there was no upside in the Cleveland Cavaliers getting Andre Drummond, because as soon as the season is over, literally, I am saying as soon as that first game, that last moment of the last game is over, Andre Drummond is on a net jet out of Cleveland. There is no way in hell Andre Drummond is going to re-sign with the Cleveland Cavaliers, which leads me to the question of why even make the trade in the first place, Cleveland? Like, do you think people want to play for the Cleveland Cavaliers now that LeBron James has been gone for like 2 years? It's just not going to happen for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Elsewhere around the bottom feeders in your National Basketball Association and in the East, there's a ton of bottom feeders. They're everywhere. You got the Atlanta Hawks, and a couple nights ago, Trae Young went for 50. Hey, weren't the Atlanta Hawks supposed to be an improving team this year? Weren't they supposed to be a better team than they were the year before? They're like 16-41 right now. And they are just a mess, just an absolute mess of a franchise in a great city in Atlanta. Like they should have a dominant basketball team year in and year out, and they don't. So there's clearly something wrong with that ownership group in Atlanta. Elsewhere, you've got the New York Knicks. Hey, my favorite rumor of the week, by far, favorite rumor of the week, Tom Thibodeau. Tom Thibodeau to the New York Knicks as their new head coach. And if I know Tom Thibodeau, he's also going to want some control over the players that he brings in. Look, I don't know about you, but I know that the way Tom Thibodeau coaches has really passed has passed the youth by. They do not respond to being yelled at by Tom Thibodeau. It is not going to work. Look, there are a couple players in the National Basketball Association that can actually handle and, if you will, actually become better because of Tom Thibodeau as a head coach. And Jimmy Butler was one of them. And even when Jimmy Butler went to the Timberwolves for his second tour of duty with Tom Thibodeau, there was absolutely nothing Tom Thibodeau could do to keep Jimmy Butler there because of the lackluster performance by the rest of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And can you blame him? Okay, so that's the New York Knicks, just an absolute disaster. Then you've got the Detroit Pistons, and we wrote this in a blog on mighty.rip about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And I should say this, thanks for listening and thanks for watching Mighty Rip. I know you have a ton of sports options out there, North America. And as an independent broadcaster, as an independent content creator, not part of the mothership, not part of Fox's version of the mothership, and certainly not part of CBS Sports, SB Nation, and all those other guys. Bleacher Report would be mad if I didn't mention them. And The Ringer does a fantastic job. We are currently entirely independent. So thank you for tuning in and watching the inaugural Mighty Rip episode. So back to the Detroit Pistons. Now, the Detroit Pistons, literally everybody in that front office needs to not receive a bonus at the end of the year. It is that simple. Like they literally need to not receive a bonus at the end of the year. And the reason for that is because of their horrific trade of Andre Drummond to the Cleveland Cavaliers for next to nothing. Look, the bad teams stay bad for a reason, because they continue to make bad decisions. The Detroit Pistons are no different than the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's not. I'm surprised those two teams don't trade with each other more often than they actually do. Hey, well, Detroit actually has a decent team, and they can't figure out how to make it work with the Pistons. So that entire front office should not receive a bonus this year because they got nothing for the league leading rebounder in a desperation trade, a fire sale for the best rebounder in the National Basketball Association. And you couldn't find a way, Detroit Pistons front office, to actually get him to a contender. Look, here's what would have happened, Detroit, had you gotten Andre Drummond to a contender. You might have actually gotten something in exchange for him. But by sending him to one of the worst basketball teams in the NBA, they had absolutely nothing to offer and aren't going to have any way of re-signing him when he hits free agency, because why would he want to play for another bottom feeder? It makes no sense, Detroit. No sense at all. Okay, Chicago, Charlotte, and Washington. 19 wins for the Bulls, 19 wins for the Hornets, and 20 for the Washington Wizards. All three of those teams All three of those teams have some nice young talent on them. I really do like some of the talent on the Charlotte Hornets. And Washington's just waiting for a certain player to come back from an injury. But I don't really see any of those teams actually figuring out how to leapfrog the Orlando Magic, who are currently 8 games under 500. Look, we talked about this a lot yesterday in our podcast, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in a little bit more detail today on the live broadcast. And the Orlando Magic, the Magic of Orlando, are currently 8 games under 500. And my prediction was that they were going to end up somewhere between 12 and 15 games under 500 and still make the playoffs. Adam Silver, there is clearly something wrong. There is absolutely something wrong with your playoff structure in the National Basketball Association when you're going to have 2 teams out of the East, the Brooklyn Nets are the other, that are going to finish well below 500. And they're going to make the playoffs, all things staying consistent. It just makes absolutely no sense. The Indiana Pacers are in the 6th seed. And yes, I brushed by the Brooklyn Nets because, I'm not surprised, and I don't wish injury on anybody, but I am not surprised Kyrie Irving has only played like 20 games for the Brooklyn Nets this year. They might as well have just redshirted him for the season because Kyrie had no desire. You could just see it. He had no desire to play for the Nets until Kevin Durant came back. And I think maybe at the start of the season he thought, okay, this is gonna be a time for me to shine. And he got about 10 games in, and then the injuries started to mount. And now he's got some sort of rotator cuff injury, which is a real thing. Like it's not something that you can quickly overcome. Those surgeries, while not so complex, the recovery time on a rotator cuff injury can be lengthy. So I'm even questioning now whether or not Kyrie's even going to be ready for the start of next season. And you heard it here first on the Mighty Rip because I haven't seen anybody else say that yet. And I will tell you that I am not convinced that the Brooklyn Nets with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving have enough pieces to dominate the East. And that's saying a lot because you're just really not sure how KD is going to come back from that injury. If KD comes back in the same way he was before, they'll be a good team just because of KD. And if Kyrie can stay healthy, they could be a 5th or 4th seed in the East next year. That is my expectation, if you will, for the Brooklyn Nets next year. Moving on to the Indiana Pacers, 33-23. They're secure where they're at. Philadelphia will most likely be the 4th seed. I don't think they're going to catch Boston, but I certainly think they're going to leapfrog the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat are a team that I don't believe in at all. Look, I know they just got Andre Iguodala, or as my wife calls him, the Iguana. They just got the Iguana, and I don't think that he has enough, honestly, left in the tank to be the kind of player that the Miami Heat need to really make some headway in the playoffs. Now, I don't like to count Jimmy Butler out because he is one of the few gamers in the National Basketball Association today. But I believe in Joel Embiid. I don't believe in Ben Simmons, but I believe in Joel Embiid. And I believe Joel Embiid is actually going to do a good job. I really believe Joel Embiid's going to do a good job in the playoffs. He is a flat-out gamer, and I would hate to have to play the Philadelphia 76ers and Joel Embiid in the first round. Look, I'm not saying they're gonna beat Boston and they're gonna beat Toronto and they're gonna beat Milwaukee and find a way to make it to the NBA championship this year. But Joel Embiid is a gamer. He is the real deal. He believes he's the best basketball player in the world, and he isn't. But maybe he's one of the top 7 or 8 basketball players in the world. And hell, don't you want your stars on your basketball team to actually believe they're the best players in the world? Like, who wants a star on their basketball team to say to somebody, I think I'm one of the top 100 players in the National Basketball Association? I am now quoting Andre Wiggins. I'm just saying it's ridiculous. So Philadelphia, I think, is going to be good. Look, I don't think Toronto has enough firepower. Love what the Celtics have. I think they could be very dangerous and could. They've got enough pieces that Danny Ainge has put in place. So I think they could find a way to go all the way this year. And Milwaukee is Milwaukee. Now, look, the Bucks are 47-8. And I ask you this question. If the Bucks were actually, if they were actually in if they were actually in the West, do you think they'd have the same record? Look, I think they'd have a record closer to the Denver Nuggets at 38-18 than this ridiculous record that they currently have. Like 47-8. They've been beating down middle school basketball teams all year. and I can say this, at least the bad teams in the West, I would consider to be good college basketball teams. But some of these bad teams in the East are just horrifically bad. So that's your Milwaukee Bucks. Moving on to the West, and the Golden State Warriors are 12-44. Now, my opinion on the Golden State Warriors being here and broadcasting to you live from the Silicon Valley, I can confidently tell you that Bob Myers might not be the reason the Warriors were as good as they were. I believe that Jerry West is the single reason the Warriors became great. And I'm not really sure Bob Myers has done a great job with this team to this point. And the point is pretty simple. I mean, if you think about Bob Myers and who he's drafted since Jerry West has left the organization, all I'm gonna say is there's a player that they drafted that is no longer on the team that I think is single-handedly one of the worst basketball players to play in the National Basketball Association. And of course, I'm talking about Evans III. I mean, just absolutely a horrific basketball player. And he's now a member of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And there's no chance in the world that he's going to make it with the T-Wolves at all. Anyways, just an absolutely horrific pick by Bob Myers and the Golden State Warriors. It does not surprise me that they are the worst basketball team in the NBA because they've done a really bad, and nobody says this. Nobody else says they have actually done a really bad job drafting over the last 3 years. Have the Golden State Warriors. I'm not saying they've done a bad job on free agency. Hell, they got Kevin Durant on their team. You can't say that about Bob Myers. He did a good job there. It's during the draft, and that's where they really needed the mind of Jerry West to actually help that team out. Look, I've got several basketball. I'm wearing a T-Wolf hat today. All I'm going to say is to the lottery goes the Timberwolves. The Phoenix Suns are a vastly improved team. The problem with the Phoenix Suns is that they were a vastly improved team at the beginning of the season. But right now, they are playing the way they played last year. If you look at the Phoenix Suns over the last, I don't know, 10 games, they're 3-7. They do not have enough firepower to survive the West. If the Phoenix Suns were in the East, they would be vying for a playoff berth and would probably be pretty close to 500. That is how good the West is. Same thing, and I can't even believe I'm going to say this, for the Sacramento Kings. They're in the same boat as Phoenix. In fact, Vlade Divac's team is still playing a little bit better. But will somebody please tell me, and I haven't been able to get anybody in the NBA to actually tell me, how does Vlade Divac still have his job? How many consecutive years of not making the playoffs, of putting together one of the worst rosters in the world, can Vlade Divac have before he officially gets canned? Like, Sacramento finally won something during the All-Star game as Buddy Hield won the three-point contest. And the owner jumped out onto the court and hugged Buddy Hield. He had finally won something for his billions of dollars that he's invested in the Sacramento Kings. Hey, here's a word of advice, Sacramento King owner. Maybe you should get a new president and GM to draft your players. Just a suggestion. Elsewhere around the West, look, the Pels, I would love to see the Pelicans find a way to sneak into the playoffs and catch Memphis. I'm really not sure they have enough time to do it. They are currently 4 games back of Memphis, and they literally need to go 7-3, 7-3, 7-3 to even have a shot at catching Memphis. So it's going to be a tall order. Zion is starting to fit in nicely. I just don't know if they have enough time to make up that deficit. The San Antonio Spurs, I gave Greg Popovich a lot of love in our podcast yesterday. I recommend you go check it out when you have a chance. San Antonio, who's also 4 games out or 3.5 games out of Memphis at this point, is going to make a push. They're going to be close. As for Portland, the Trailblazers are a team that without Dame Lillard have no chance of actually making a push at catching the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, as for the Memphis Grizzlies, they're currently 28-28, and we all know that they've had a great season to this point. The question is, do they have enough on that roster to get them through the backside of the second half of the NBA season? Does Memphis have enough? And it's sort of a question of, does Memphis have enough? And do the teams below Memphis, have enough to catch them? We talked about Portland, and with Dame being out for a little while, it's going to be tough for them. It's San Antonio, New Orleans do have a chance, and it wouldn't surprise me if Memphis tanked. It wouldn't surprise. I mean, they've got a tough schedule coming up. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Dallas and Oklahoma and Houston. The Dallas Mavericks, Luka has done a great job this year. They're basically a 500 team without Luka, who's got a nagging ankle injury. If I were the Dallas Mavericks at this point, I would try to remain in the 7th or 6th seed if I could. I would prefer to play against the Denver Nuggets versus the Clippers. So Dallas has to do some math in order to make that happen. They also need to find a way to rest Luka, protect him from himself, and make sure he's healthy for the playoffs. OKC, all I can say is a fantastic job by that ownership group, a fantastic job by the coaching staff, a fantastic job by, I can't believe I'm going to say this, Chris Paul and the rest of the players on that team to be in the position they're in. Look, they're not going to win an NBA title, but they've done a very respectable job in the NBA this year. Small ball, Houston Rockets. I'm so sick and tired of people saying that you can't win with small ball. Look, when you've got a player like Russell Westbrook, and I encourage you to go listen to our podcast on Russell Westbrook. When you've got a player like Russell Westbrook, who does what Russell Westbrook does, he opens up the court for the other four players on that basketball team that are like fined if they move in front of the 3-point line. Literally, I'm convinced Covington and Harden will get fined by D'Antonio if they even attempt to go across the 3-point line when Russell Westbrook is penetrating. It's a good offense. Will it hold up in the playoffs is always the question. And we can always talk about what happens when the lights get certain bright on and get placed on Harden in the playoffs. We'll just have to see. But an outside chance at an NBA title this year do the Houston Rockets have. Don't be fooled by Utah and Denver. They do not have enough to get by. I don't even think they have enough to get by Houston. They certainly don't have enough to get by the Clippers. And there's not a chance in hell LeBron and AD are going to lose to Denver or Utah in the playoffs this year. Good seasons for both of those teams, but they just don't have enough firepower. As for the Clippers and as for the Lakers, I've thought for the last 6 weeks that the Clippers had made the correct moves to bolster their roster. And they went ahead and they did it earlier in the week with the signing of Reggie Jackson. Reggie Jackson got signed by the Clippers. And I heard all of these people on all of the other big broadcasting sports media platforms saying, oh, I don't know if the Reggie Jackson signing really makes a difference. And I think they're crazy because Reggie Jackson is 15 to 20 points a night in the playoffs. And that is something that the Clippers are going to need. Look, the Clippers have not been healthy. I don't care what we say about load management. And Paul George certainly hasn't been healthy either this year. The Clippers are going to need every possible piece of scoring that they can get in the playoffs to assist Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, just because they might not be 100% healthy at the start of the playoffs. And with the playoff season that lasts like 2 quarters, they're going to need everything that they can possibly get to get them there. So that's my theory on the Clippers. The Lakers, on the other hand, are a completely different story. I don't think they've made enough moves to sort of guarantee that they're going to be able to get by the Clippers. We're coming up on it. We've got 2 minutes left in our first ever Mighty Rip live broadcast. So I'll wrap it up with this as it relates to the Lakers. And the Lakers are a team that with Anthony Davis and Danny Green, Alex Caruso, Kuzma, and of course, LeBron James are relying on the deflated tires of Rondo to help this team actually win a championship. And let me say this, Rajon Rondo, I love him, but don't tell me that you think playoff Rondo's actually got anything left in the tank to be called playoff Rondo. Look, I think there might be one game in the playoffs where you're going to see the headlines on the Ringer and you're going to see it on ESPN and they're going to say playoff Rondo made his appearance. And then he's going to be like the gopher from Groundhog or the groundhog from Groundhog's Day. And he's going to go back in his hole. That is playoff Rondo. He just doesn't have anything left in the tank. All right. So real quick, we teased it a little bit at the beginning of the show. Now, the National Football League has agreed to allow gambling lounges in stadiums across North America. Now, they have to be in cities where gambling has been allowed. So it's a handful of states that will have these gambling lounges in them, which seems like a big deal. But when you read the details of this, you find out that no gambling is actually going to be allowed. There's not going to be a window that you can walk up to place a bet. What the National Football League has said, which is just crazy, is that you're going to be able to make electronic bets off of your mobile phone while you're in the gambling lounge. Now, I ask you this: why can't I do that when I'm sitting in my plush suite or when I'm sitting in my seat in the stadium to begin with? Why, Roger Goodell and the National Football League, do I need to go into a lounge to do this? It is so ridiculous. I made the comparison of, like, you go into a bar in a stadium and they say, yeah, you can hang out here and you can watch the game, but you can't have a cocktail. It makes no sense, National Football League. I'm just saying, it makes absolutely no sense at all. At all. So listen, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our very first ever live broadcast of the Mighty Rip. And I appreciate you all guys all listening. Now, you can find the Mighty Rip on iHeartRadio, on Spotify, on every other podcasting app out there. We're basically on all of them at this point. And the show is actually doing really well. So we thought we would try a live broadcast on YouTube to see what kind of feedback we'd get. Do check out also our mighty.rip website. That's mighty.rip. That is the actual URL for the website. Fresh content on a daily basis. Okay, so for the Mighty Rip, I am Dave DeBaugh, reminding you that sometimes players, coaches, and front office folks make horrifically bad decisions. And it's our jobs as sports fans to set them straight.